Welcome to On the Rise. I am Evan Murray, and this is awesome. We're here to talk about all the fun facts of Chinese language music. Hey, Helen, how you doing? Nice. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Evan. Nice to hear you. I don't see you yet, but I hear you.
Yeah, so it's like I'm in the middle of a typhoon here, but it was, Saturday evening. What else do I have to do but work? So that's great.
Hey,
and
I thought this was not a job. I thought podcasts are like it's like a passion thing, like that's what everybody to do a podcast. It's kind of like going on vacation in your head. So
yeah, I'll think of it that way. I'll think of it.
Thanks. It makes me feel great as your guest.
So Helen, please tell me about you. Who are you? What do you do? And nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Evan. I am a musician based out of Beijing, China, but I'm also Chinese American, first generation. I immigrated when I was 6. I went back to China in the early 2000s, so it's been a while, and you can probably guess my age because of that. And I have been in the past a TV show host and a radio personality. So if I have my radio voice on and I'm trying to over enunciate, that's probably because I'm a little bit brainwashed. And that's me in a nutshell.
Hey, fantastic. So you told me like you're a first generation American, which means were you born in the United States or were you born in Beijing?
I'm an immigrant. So I immigrated to the United States at age 6 and a bit. So I actually started school in the US when I was about 7 years old, in the first grade. So I was always kind of a year behind everyone. But yeah, I'm American though, because I did the entire process of going around America. My family moved around a lot. And so, I lived in Texas, lived in Louisiana, lived just south of Chicago in a little town called DeKalb. Lived in Los Angeles, lived in Massachusetts. So I kind of went from the heartland and did like a big circle and eventually ended up yeah. So
Ended
I've
up
seen
where?
it all. In Los Angeles, where Asians eventually, I think, land somewhere on the West Coast. So it's kind of like, a magnet that pulls us there. It just took me a while to get there.
Yeah. It's like the, what was that Nicolas Cage movie where all the angels go to the beach in the morning?
Yeah, but we're not angels.
Right, okay,
we're just there because, we're like across the pond over there somewhere we're from. And if you really squint extremely hard, you might be able to see the outline now, which is
okay.
Yeah, like fresh off the boat, so to speak.
So, can you tell me about? Do you remember being like? I mean, I know no one remembers being born, but do you remember living in Beijing? And like, do you remember the transition? Can you recall any of that from when you were very young?
Yeah, I mean, I was 6, so it was kind of like, if you talk about foundational memories, really start having like legit memories around age like 4 and 5. And I was a bit earlier because for whatever reason, I managed to store enough of this to continue to traumatize myself throughout life. But I actually remember getting off the plane. And first time on an airplane, my uncle's then fiance was a flight attendant. So so I didn't go with my family. My mom and dad were already in the US. So I basically got loaded on a plane by myself, where the crew of the plane then kind of adopted me for the course of the flight. And then I was kind of taken up to immigration and then it kind of pushed over to the other side. And I remember coming out of immigration by myself with my little suitcase, and I'm 6 years old. I got my little carry-on, and my carry-on is like all the most important stuff, like my teddy bear, and I there's like this kind of viewing window, because this is before like all the terrorism stuff. So people still had a lot of access to the airports back then. And when I came out of my gate, there was like this viewing window where there was like this kind of like almost like a glass walkway where my parents could look down on me. And when I looked up and I saw my family, I saw my mom and dad, which I hadn't seen for like a long time. My first thought was to squat very Chinese style in the middle of the walkway where everybody's exiting the plane and blocking everybody, and then start opening my suitcase and showing them all my stuff. Like, and so there was ground littered with teddy bears and some like sweaters that my grandmother had knit me, and like some, airplane snacks that the stewardesses had lowered, like not stewardesses, flight attendants. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry to the profession for saying that word. But
Uh-oh.
they had loaded me up with like snacks from the plane. So I was just laying them out on the walkway. And all of these poor people coming off the plane was just like making this little turnaround. And my parents are kind of like semi happy and overjoyed and also slightly freaking out because they're afraid that somebody's going to step on me because I'm quite small. And there's like people walking off the plane like in droves. So they're all like, no, get up, get up, get up, get up. Oh, I love you. Get up, get up, get up, get up. And that was like literally my first memory of the United States. And I still have that. It's like a really vivid memory. I like remember all the snacks all laid out on that really, icky 1980s airport carpet with the patterns, like, a la The Shining.
And
Mhm.
what about your own music? And like, what are you currently doing right now? Like, what is like? Tell me about your. So you told me a little bit about like significance of where you're born, like your arrival into the United States, and now what about your music itself? Like, how many albums do you have? What kind of music are you doing? Like, can you give me the Helen that's doing the actual music stuff now?
Okay, the not the 6-year-old with all the teddy bears laid out. Okay, we're making a bit of a time jump to 30 something
Well,
Helen,
yeah, we're gonna go, but we're gonna like
40 something
travel. We're gonna
Helen now.
travel through your life at different times. So, but
Well,
yeah.
plot me right now down in Germany. I am currently in Berlin. I'm actually kind of semi-trapped here because my child is half German, and we came here because we had the child here for logistical, financial, and also just lots of random reasons. And then we went back to China. We had a flat in China, and then we decided we have to pack up stuff in Germany. So we flew in like the day that they announced that Wuhan was going into COVID lockdown. So it was, we were
Oh.
on the plane and we were getting on the plane when we got the announcement. I think it was a text message like, oh my gosh, my friends are like, are you seeing this? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm all like, oh, it's lucky that we're getting on the plane. We'll just come back in 3 weeks and have missed the whole thing.
Yeah, 3 weeks. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was not 3 weeks. And 2.5 years later, I'm still here in Berlin. And since then, I've always done music in China. I started doing music when I was very little, but in China was when I kind of found my kind of non-Asian kid playing piano with classical music and listening to jazz groove, and actually went into a rock band. And since then, I've played in 3 different bands. One was called Zio, later renamed Free the Birds, because out of a act of, I don't know why, just a completely unintentional, I should not have renamed it kind of moment. And then there was another band called Pet Conspiracy, which I left to form the current act that I'm in, Nova Heart. And all 3 have released on different labels, have released different music, mostly EPs, because apparently I am not an album girl. It takes me a long time actually to put together an album. I write a lot of music, and not very much of it gets released because I'm a bit of I think I'm a bit of a perfectionist in a way, to my detriment. And so Nova Heart has had 1 album, 1 EP. It's now releasing the second EP, which will transition to an album. There's lots of music that gets performed that we've never released. But previous to that, we also had releases with Pet Conspiracy and also Zio. So I don't know how many you would count that as. Like, I guess actual physical releases of things that are like, printed and put out there. I've probably released about 4.
Is it the
In
same genre of music? Like, is it
No,
and
no.
what? So let's talk about that. Like, definitively, what is the what is the period of time this is happening in, or are these like eras that you lived through, or this was
I think it's
were
like
these
just a natural.
consecutive?
It was
Okay,
kind of
talk to me about
consecutive. It was
that.
kind of overlapping because sometimes you would run 2 projects at the same time. It was kind of random because I had other jobs. So I was a radio show host. I had a TV show in China for a bit. I started my career in China as working for MTV. So all of
Okay.
that overlap of stuff going on, and Zio happened, and it just kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. And next thing you know, we were signed to Warner Music, and it was kind of like not. It wasn't like my primary thing that I was doing, but then because it just got so much bigger, it became the primary thing I was doing. And then because of interpersonal issues, actually, we really love each other as a band, but people had life stuff happen, like parents getting sick or having like just issues, life issues. The band eventually kind of dissolved, and then the pieces of that band formed into Nova Heart as well. So the bassist became our manager. The guitarist stayed with Nova Heart until he immigrated to Sweden a few years ago. Um, and the other two members, they kind of went their separate ways. And Pet Conspiracy was something I was doing kind of at the same time. It was a side project. It was electronic music. I was kind of in a strict like kind of 5-piece band, two guitar, bass, drums, etc. So I really wanted to do or explore electronic music because I had dipped my toes in the rave scene in the late 90s and early 2000s. So I always had like kind of a special place in my heart for electronic music. Around early 2000, LCD sound system came out, and it was like for me mind blowing because it's a combination of everything I loved. And I loved the lyrics that James Murphy was like writing at the time, the way his kind of style. It was kind of a thought that I really want to do something like this, but it wasn't something that my current band at the time could really embrace. So when I was approached by an electronic musician to work collaboratively on a relatively short term project, kind of one off. I said, okay, why not? But then that thing kind of blew up as well. And then that one off kind of just kept on extending and extending. And at one point, I had the chance to tour Europe with the Conspiracy. And I said, screw it. I want to do a European tour. Like that's kind of like a benchmark for every musician, right? To go and do an international tour. So we did that. And then, but Pet Conspiracy also had just issues, interpersonal issues. The members kept on changing. And it was never really a project that didn't start off with the momentum or the feeling of it being like, this is what we're doing long term. We're planning for it to be a real project. It was always kind of amorphous. And then eventually that was dissolving around the same time that Zio was dissolving. And I was just kind of like left by my lonely. I had broken my leg. I was sitting in my house. I had a computer and pretty much not very much else because it was 6 floors up. So going up and down the stairs was definitely a bit of an issue, no elevator. So I was a bit kind of house trapped and in quarantine before there was quarantine. And I said, screw it. I'm going to open GarageBand. Don't have anybody here with me, no musicians, no band these days. I'm just going to start writing music. And eventually we started looking for pieces to kind of turn the music I was doing, very rudimentary tracks on GarageBand, into actual tracks. I worked with a musician out of Rome called Rodion, who that's his art name, Rodion, but his real name is Eduardo Giaffinelli. And then we kind of did this as the two of us doing long distance, sending tracks back and forth. But then I wanted to involve real musicians, and that also brought more life to it. So in every single layer, it was kind of like we just kept on adapting to the elements that came in. And what was surprising is that before we had performed our first show, before we had done anything, we submitted our music to South by Southwest and we got picked. And it was like, oh, wow. Shit. Yeah, we don't have really anything. Like we haven't rehearsed, we've done a little bit of rehearsals, but not really, So maybe we should really take this seriously. So the first tour of the band Nova Heart was actually the US and Canada. So we went to Canadian Music Week on the back of that same tour. We had also a show at Clockenflap because my previous 2 acts had a pretty strong following, and we had played at Clockenflap previously. So they were like, even though we haven't heard this band perform, we like your demo tracks and we know the musicians, so we trust you enough to give you a stage.
It's very interesting, to be honest.
I think like you have when you are this is the thing about opportunity. And when I was living in the United States, there was never a thought that I could be an indie musician because there wasn't really many indie musicians that looked like me. And so I was really on a traditional trajectory. I was going to, graduate from university, went to business school. Yeah, I did music on the side as a minor because this is what I loved, but it wasn't what I thought I could make much of my life. So I studied music industry thinking, okay, you know what, there's nobody who looks like me, but maybe one day, if I'm really smart, I'll be a manager to somebody who is actually successful. There's a lot of internalized racism there, which took another 20 years to figure out for me and a lot of other Asians. Um, but
Can
when
we
I
can we
came,
just talk about that for a
yeah,
split second? Can we kind of just can you kind of dive can you expand on that? Like what does that mean when you say that? And like don't feel shy
no,
about
I'm
talking
not.
about it either. Yeah. Okay.
I think like as growing up, and it's starting to change now, which for me, like literally every time I see something that I look at, like these new Asian artists, Asian stars, Asian movie stars, um key figures in media, every time I see them on TV, sometimes I kind of want to cry, because when I was little, like the only place that you saw Asian women were like in the stories were either like running a Chinese restaurant in movies and films, right? Running a Chinese
Sure.
restaurant,
Yeah, I can
like
see
a
that. Yeah.
yeah, like the quickie mart, or as a
It
prostitute.
was tokenized,
Unfortunately,
right? There was like a
it was
token.
super tokenized, and so like
Yeah.
and there were the images of women were highly sexualized. So like for me being an Asian female, I kind of felt like you either had to be like super desexualize yourself and make yourself into like this other kind of overdriven nerd, or you had to like embrace the fact that you were just a piece of meat that was like almost like a fetish. And when you say somebody's a fetish, it just
Wow.
completely dehumanizes them. And I think that
Yeah.
was like part of the way that popular culture treated Asians for a long time. I mean, my favorite like director, Stanley Kubrick, if he made Full Metal Jacket, and the only time you see Asians in that is just like it's just startlingly sad. I'm not a Vietnamese refugee or a prostitute, but those were like the two images that were available to me. Um, and so like I just felt like, well, I don't want to be that. I remember like I studied musical theater, and my junior year of college, my professor, who was I was studying musical theater and also vocal arts, and he said, "Look, there's a role for you. Like they're doing open cast call auditions for a role that it for an Asian." And I was like, how weird that is to hear that you're getting like there's a casting call for somebody who looks like you, very rarely. And so I was like, oh, cool. And he was like, yeah, I brought you the libretto. I can take it home. You can study it, and then if you want to, here's the information for the casting call. You just have to call them and set up an appointment. And then he handed me the libretto, and it was Miss Saigon. And I had remember
Mm.
seeing the show with my mother when I was like 13 years old, and just walking out of that theater so humiliated, like in a way. And I was like, and at the same time, I was like, okay, well, there's an opportunity for me here. I could do this. I could try out, and I probably won't make it, but at least I could try. But then I thought about the role, and like going up and down on a pole and being a prostitute, and Madame Butterfly turned into this very kind of what I thought was an embarrassing portrayal of Asian women. And that was the only thing that had come up in the last few years. And
Oh my
I just
God.
I didn't want to do it. I loved like stuff that there was like Rent and other shows, but frankly the opportunities were rare and far behind between. And Miss Saigon, there was like a huge open casting call because there was like a cast of mostly Asian women all playing prostitutes. So what opportunities did I have? Right. So you really
Right.
internalize that, and then you kind of knock yourself out and you say, okay, this is not possible. But in early 2000s, people like Karen O started coming out, and um, it was there was like kind of a tickle of possibility. I wouldn't say it was like a full on, like raging, like, powerful punch of possibility. It was more like a tickle. And then I went to China, and it became like, okay, I'm not different here. I could be anyone. And I realized if I want to be a rock star, I can be a rock star. screw this. I'm gonna go and get a band, and we're gonna start performing in shitty bars. Um, and as soon as that opportunity comes up, the belief system changes. And I think I didn't realize, even until now, how very much I hated Asian things because I was taught to hate Asian things. Um, Things that I was constantly taught to hide. Like, you know, even now I'm self-conscious when people come to my house because when I cook, it smells weird, right? Compared to what Western people cook. Like it doesn't smell like pizza and pasta and French fries and burgers. It smells like, soy sauce and fried eggs and whatever broth you're making, which is always a little bit smelling different. And that self-consciousness is something that's still kind of inside of me when I have guests come over. Unless of course they're Asian, because then I know their house stinks as much as mine. It just smells the same.
I'm trying to swallow it, but it's like it's hard to
It tastes
swallow.
like stinky tofu.
Yeah, no, I like. I mean, God, I mean,
Yeah,
really,
God, it
Helen. I
stinks
mean,
so
you're just.
you know what? I think you probably discovered this as an interviewer. I've had the benefit of interview as well, being on the other side. And that's one of the wonderful things about wanting to do interview. I worked for years and years, probably interviewed hundreds of people as well. And every single time I come away from most interviews a little bit more enlightened and thinking just slightly differently than when I came in. And that's just been the benefit of talking to people or having an excuse like a podcast to talk to people, and also listening to a lot of podcasts. I think that the way the media works and the way that people like you and me can dictate a totally new form of media has really also worked a lot in changing perception and gaining perception. Um, and that's just I listen to a lot of podcasts. Okay. Right now these days is like I've been listening to a lot of like this what fresh new hell, which is all parenting from the perspective of two slightly embittered moms, but funny, very funny women.
All right, and back to music. So when we talk about music outside the Chinese languages, what are you listening to, or who is your favorite, I suppose? Who's your favorite artist outside of the Chinese language artists?
I actually didn't discover the Chinese language artists until much later because I grew up in the US listening to American radio and going to American record stores. And so my favorite artist, pretty much, I think, still in my life, I discovered her in my late teens, and I've just held on to her, is Nina Simone. I just can't get enough of it. I think I probably listen to her at least like 3 times a week. I'll just sometimes listen to a whole full one of those. She has a lot of best of collections. I just put one on. Um, because to me, she embodies a very strong, politically thoughtful human being, a little bit crazy, which also gives her perspective, the hint of what crazy can bring, which is honesty. I think sometimes when people are considered crazy by society, it's because they're willing to say truths that are intolerable for people who have like a filter, and they're really willing to get like dirty into it. So a lot of my favorite artists are from that generation of slightly crazy, like Marvin Gaye and Nina Simone. Um, and they had a mission, but they also had a lot of interpersonal problems and thoughts, and they also had a very strong depth of emotion that is beautifully communicated through their music, and a skill and talent level that I would never reach. I just kind of gave up on ever reaching the skill that they have because like Nina Simone
Interesting.
is an amazing musician in every possible way. But what I did try and find in myself over time, and I don't know if I ever get there, is maybe an ounce of her honesty.
Wow. Eloquent, quite eloquent how you just formulate this and how you're talking about it. So, and now you segued something there that I'm kind of interested in is that you said that you hadn't listened to any Chinese language artists until your late teens. Can you tell me why? And can you tell me who are some of your favorite artists in the Chinese language world?
I mean, it's not completely true. I'm going to take back a bit of that. I used to go back to China quite frequently. My family wanted to spend summers here, so I could be close to my extended family. And so, pretty much from age 11 or so on, I did a lot of summers in China. And my cousins exposed me at the time to Wang Fei, which I totally like kind of at the time, all my internalized racism just decided to shat on, like I was like, oh, she's not as good as like Britney. I was like, oh God, I can't believe I said that. So it was, I never liked Britney. So you're good. Actually, she's not as good as like, the artist I was listening to at the time. I'm sorry to all my gay friends, but she's awesome now, but like at that time I was not into it.
Metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, exactly. um, but it's at the heart of everything. Like I kind of like just kind of rejected it because she was singing Cantonese. I couldn't understand her early albums, and also because I kind of felt like whatever in the West is going to be superior to what's happening here, because that was the way I was brainwashed, growing up.
There's such a deep realization, I think a lot of us are going through in life right now, where we're starting, a lot of people are starting to wake up how brainwashed we've been by like Western media, period. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Just
yeah,
the ideologies and everything is like just connected in our life, and how we notice things and do things is like, oh my God, like
our
how did I
choices.
get in my head?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It was like
what we
implanted there.
consider
You know what I
tasteful and
mean?
what we consider not tasteful. Um, like I kind of came to this realization over time. A lot of it comes from you get to a point of personal rejection, and then you go back to your home country, and then you face a different energy of acceptance and of possibility. And then when you walk a long enough path down that acceptance and possibility, and then you return to the West, and which is what I had a certain amount of success in international countries. And I was remember looking around and looking at the bands that yes, in certain ways they were better than me, but in other ways they were also not. They were, for me, a lot of the people that I played with and a lot of international festivals I went to, I saw a lot of people who had shared extremely similar experiences throughout their life trying to make art that was different, and they couldn't because they had such extremely similar experiences. So I had like a room full of 100 bands with extremely similar experiences, except for maybe one or two different personal traumas. And then they were trying to create like super different music, but it was just sounding always a bit derivative because they heard the same
Mm.
thing, they experienced the same things, they spoke the same language, they grew up in the same neighborhoods, eating the same foods. And I started realizing that art is it's a composite of our life, and the more we
Wow.
take little pieces and we glue it together, like the artists, like U2 is you might hate YouTube, but they were legitimately great in the late 80s and early 90s because they went through like a time in Ireland which was like crazy, and they had super different experiences than 99% of the people in the world, because they were experiencing like this kind of like semi-war torn country that had these desperately different ideologies, but yet it was the same group of people. It was kind of this internalized civil war, and they grew up in that with like its energy and this passion, and they wrote songs that communicated that, and they were different than let's say the Strokes.
Exactly, but it's like, how come I didn't know that? How come I didn't look at it like that before? So
um
that's yeah,
it
it's kind of mind blowing.
And that's it, folks. Please continue to listen to the next parts or continue to the next episode. Please don't forget to hit subscribe and follow On the Rise. This is awesome.